The environment of business, the organization-environment relationship. Unit 1 from Chapter 3, Lesson 2, Part 2. Now that we've looked at the external environment, we need to consider the environment that is closest to the organization itself, being the task environment, the customers, competitors, suppliers, and the labor market from which the company can draw its employees. Thinking about each of these elements in relation to how they are influenced by the external environment and in turn influence the internal environment of the organization is very helpful for understanding the complex reality of management today. Customers are tremendously important to every business as they are the people and organizations that acquire the goods and services that the organization produces. They are the recipients of what we can deem the organization's output. And to the extent that the organization is adding value and contributing a meaningful product or service, customers will be pleased. Hopefully they will also be loyal customers, and therefore this element of the task environment has a direct relationship with the organization's success. Organizations in a changing environment have to be very responsive to the needs and changing demands of their customers. Next, and perhaps less pleasant than thinking about customers, is the reality of competitors. Other organizations that are in the same industry or the same type of business as us that provide goods and services aimed at the same customers we are targeting. So they are essentially competing for the loyalty of the same group of customers. An interesting example of misdiagnosing your competitors comes from Parker Pens, where the new CEO promptly asked his top management team to identify their top competitors. Everyone listed luxury pen brands, and the CEO promptly pointed out to them that they didn't really understand which customers they were providing for. He pointed out to them that the customers that they were in fact servicing were people that were in the market for buying a luxury gift. And therefore, any other company that was in the business of providing luxury gifts, whether it was watches or jewelry, was in fact a competitor. The minute that they broadened their horizons in terms of identifying their competitors, their business also became more successful. No business can survive without its suppliers. These are the companies that provide the raw materials that the organization uses to produce its output. Each of these suppliers forms part of the supply chain for the business. And essentially, they're part of a network of multiple businesses and individuals that are connected to the organization through the flow of products and services. The last component of the task environment is the labor market, which represents the people in the environment that can be hired to work for the organization. Regardless of the industry, all organizations need a supply of trained and qualified personnel. IT organizations need programmers, marketing agencies need graphic designers, and accounting firms need qualified chartered accountants. There are a lot of things that influences the labor market. It can be how active unions are, legislation about minimum wage. It can also be the availability of employees. And this is a specific issue in South Africa where there aren't enough employees with the right skill set and skill levels available for the organization to employ. Just a quick note on this, the labor market here is different from employees in the internal environment, which we will discuss later. No discussion of the external environment is complete without considering the relationship of the organization with its environment. The external environment creates uncertainty for managers, and it is therefore their responsibility to respond to this uncertainty by creating an adaptive organization. They can influence the external environment and they are influenced by the external environment, but they do not control it. And so it creates a high level of uncertainty. Managers don't always have sufficient clear information about all of the elements of the environment. They can't always predict political decisions or economic growth rates, even though they can try to analyze them. And therefore it becomes difficult for them to fully predict the changes that are coming their way. That is why managers need to continuously scan the external environment and prepare their organization as best they can to adapt. Let's consider the relationship of the external environment and uncertainty to the business. Firstly, we can look at the rate of change in factors in the environment, whether it's low or high, and the number of factors in the organizational environment. Very few companies have the luxury of having low uncertainty on both fronts, so a low rate of change in the environment and a low number of factors that influence it. And certainly this might have been the case in the past, but today businesses are far more likely to be faced with very high uncertainty. So there is a tremendous amount of factors in the organizational environment that can change, and the pace at which those factors can change is also quite significant. So the organization's only choice in response is to adapt to its environment.
In order to adapt to the environment, it's very important for the business to fulfill certain roles. An important one is boundary spanning roles that link and coordinate the organization with its external environment. And there are a couple of components to this. Firstly, business intelligence. So what is going on inside their own business? And then also a competitive intelligence. What are their competitors doing? An interesting example of the importance of competitive intelligence is how Cell C was going to launch in the South African market with per second billing. And through completely legal, we won't discuss the ethical implications just now, but completely legal means phoning people from the reception at Cell C, asking questions like when are you going to open, what contracts are you going to offer, portraying themselves as future clients. They discovered that Cell C was going to launch with per second billing. And so, the Friday afternoon before the Monday that Cell C was going to launch, Vodacom very cleverly launched with per second billing and sort of pulled the carpet out underneath Cell C's feet. They are still trying to catch up today. But it is definitely important to know what our competitors in the market are up to, of course, in an ethical way. Inter-organizational partnerships are also important, and so businesses need to look at how they can reduce the boundaries and change the narrative from being competitive to collaborative. In the face of mounting competition, many organizations are looking for opportunities to minimize the impact of competition on their bottom line. One way of doing this is through mergers, when two or more companies combine to become one. An example of this is South African Breweries and Miller that merged to become SAB Miller. Another option that companies have is to engage in joint ventures, also known as strategic alliances, and this can often be for the duration of a specific project or initiative, so it does not become a permanent, long-term legal form of ownership. An example of an initiative like this is the Smart Car. It was a collaboration between Swatch Watches, who were experts in making small things, and Mercedes, who were experts in making cars. And this strategic alliance gave us the Smart Car, which was a very small vehicle.
One of the trends in managing the level of competition is the shift to a partnership paradigm. So in the past, you could look at business as a very adversarial interaction. Whether it was with suppliers or fellow competitors, there was always a bit of suspicion. If we share any of our insights or knowledge, then it might be to our detriment. And so what we see in the partnership orientation is that it's very important for there to be trust, and that value is added on both sides in terms of how the contract is negotiated. If we look at supplier contracts, for example, we see a shift from short-term contracts to long-term contracts. So the idea is that the supplier becomes part of the network or the supply chain of the company adding value. A really good example of this can be seen in a company like Dell Computers, who essentially integrated their supply chain up to 3 levels. So their suppliers, suppliers, suppliers. Every time someone ordered a computer online with Dell, it would immediately trigger an order with their supplier, supplier, supplier. And so the long-term contracting became very important for them in terms of coordinating how they were adding value. That means that they couldn't only focus on their own profitability, but they have to deal fairly with their suppliers. They have to have a long-term relationship with them so that they can ensure that the supplier continues to provide cutting-edge technology and is not just giving them rubbish at rock-bottom prices.